Today is April 26, 2021. Welcome to Our Voices. Today we're going to talk with a forensic psychologist about fear in relation to the police and the encounter with African Americans. Here in the past, there have been recent stories where when an unarmed black man is killed, the police officer, his statement is read as, "I feared for my life." And a lot of times the officer is found not guilty. And again, I want to talk about this subject of fear, again, with Dr. Kristi Williams Dumas. This is Our Voices. Welcome to Our Voices. I have a very special guest with me. She is a forensic psychologist, and we are going to discuss the subject of fear in relation to what is going on in today's society. I have with me Dr. Kristi Williams Dumas. Dr. Dumas, how are you today?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Good. Doctor, we have a lot to go over, and I have some questions to ask you. But before I start, please tell me something and tell the listeners something about Dr. Kristi Williams Dumas.
Well, I am a forensic psychologist by trade. Together with my husband, we own Dumas Psychology Collective. We also own the Brain Training Center, where we do EEG lead neurofeedback and brain training. I am a human rights commissioner on the Beckley Human Rights Commission here in Raleigh County. And let's see, what else? I am a member of the most illustrious sorority on the planet, Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. I'm also a member of the Links Incorporated. I am a philanthropist, and I am super involved in my community, serve on several boards that are very important to me, like the state CASA board. And so I enjoy trying to better my community and really being involved. I've recently gotten politically involved. We are in the midst of trying to pass the Beckley Crown Ordinance to end race-based hair discrimination. That is an initiative that is very important to me right now. So I have a lot of irons in the fire, and I tend to keep busy. So glad to be here with you and chat it up a little bit about what's going on in our society.
Dr. Dumas, as you well know, a 16-year-old young lady was recently shot and killed by the Columbus Police Department. I've had some discussions on Facebook, going back and forth. Then last week, a 20-year-old Dante Wright was shot and killed. And probably a day after that, a 13-year-old in Chicago was shot and killed, unarmed. And of course, the big trial of Derek Chauvin found not guilty. And it's kind of like a pattern. The police using excessive force to diffuse a situation. A lot of folks don't understand, and I've been preaching this right here, and what bothers me is when the police officer says, "I feared for my life," again, it tells a different story as far as how they were feared for their life. We look at Columbus, where the 16-year-old was in a tussle with these two girls. Looks more like a domestic situation. And so the cop comes in and he fires 4 rounds in her chest. And so some folks, they feel that it was somewhat justified. But I asked this question: what is the difference between a 16-year-old girl who was holding a knife and a 17-year-old kid named Kyle Farnsworth holding an AR-15?
Yeah.
And he lived to see another day.
Yes. So I think a good place to start is understanding the concept of fear. And there, when you hear the word fear, that is a very subjective word. Now, Webster's dictionary defines it as, a myriad of feelings in preparation for danger. Feared danger, a consequence beyond one's control. And so when we really think about what fear is and what fear should be for law enforcement, it takes on a whole different connotation. And we have to ask ourselves, why do police officers, if we're going by this written definition, in preparation of anticipated danger, why is it that they always anticipate the worst type of danger when it is interacting with people of color, Black and brown people?
Good observation, yes.
What is that? What societal cues, what standards have been set for them to use a different measuring rod of anticipated danger when it comes to us as opposed to other people? Now, I think what has happened in Columbus is very layered. There's a lot to unpack there. We could start with children in the foster care system and how they have been treated, what their expectation is, what their social code of conduct is, their history of trauma. We could start there, and we could end with this new, very popular, what I call mob culture, that we see all over social media and the internet. Now there are videos and tapings of children and young adults who have problems with someone else showing up to their house on their yard with 30 people. I've seen in the last month, I've seen about 4 videos like that. And so I think that social media perpetuates some of the worst of society and then it becomes magnified, it becomes glorified. And so there's a lot to unpack about what happened in Ohio, but I keep bringing people back to the point that you just made. Why is it that Black and brown people who have not killed 8 people in a church or,
Right.
haven't killed anyone, why is it that deadly force is always used with people of color, but all of your mass murderers who are Caucasian live to see another day, or even
Yes.
live to get their trip to Burger King?
Yes.
You know,
There was recently a video out on social media where white guy, he is fighting 2 police officers,
mhm, mhm,
and he takes the nightstick, beats the cop. He's beating the cop, gets up, he gets into the police car and
mhm.
drive off. And not one of them pull their guns out. I mean, I don't understand it. So, and then another thing is this right here, as you mentioned about social media, how a lot of folks, some folks are bad mouthing social media, but let's face it, social media versus mainstream media, if it wasn't for social media, a lot of our stories would never, it would never get told. And we got to really thank that girl who videotaped George Floyd on the ground, because if that wasn't recorded, Derek Chauvin will be out today. So again, so how do we, you mentioned mob culture. Define mob culture again, please.
Well, I think when we are talking about a mob culture, it is, and we can use the fear definition again. It's the fact that we have stopped dealing with things individually and only find ways often to deal with things collectively. So we've lost, it's almost a fear of meeting things head on in a very systematic and in a very controlled and calculated way. And there are a lot of terms that we use in the field of psychology when we are considering things like, group think, or things like, hiding in the masses and feeling emboldened when we are in that place. We have a lot more courage to do things that otherwise we wouldn't do independently. So I think that's what I'm talking about when I say a mob culture type of situation. And it emboldens people to think, act, and feel in ways that they wouldn't if they were, just as an individual.
Are there any other complex examples of fear? Because, one thing in particular I've learned, people fear what they don't know.
Sure.
And
they fear what they don't know, what they haven't necessarily been exposed to, and what they don't care to. Some of the things that we're discussing, people who are not of color don't have a point of reference for. However, they haven't put forth that extra effort to learn about it or allow themselves to be uncomfortable enough to really find out what's going on. And that's part of the problem.
So is it safe to say that when the police officer is in a situation, their first train of thought is it excessive force, or is it just to diffuse the situation, in your opinion?
I don't think that they are thinking either one of those things. I don't think that excessive force, whether or not what I'm about to do is equivalent to the situation at hand, I think that that's the problem, that's not their primary thought. Their primary thought is letting the fear and the anticipated danger overwhelm their ability to reasonably think about what force here is warranted and necessary. I think that's the number one problem.
Do you feel that the police have this sense of the old style where they're in that hunting mode where they feel like they have to go and kill persons of color as a badge of honor or like a trophy?
So I think that hunting is probably a little harsh, and may not accurately depict what's going on and the break in human decency. I don't think they're hunting Black people down as a badge of honor. And I think there are a lot of great cops out there. I come from a long line family of law enforcement, uncles, cousins, several chief of police where I'm from. So
Mhm.
I think that there's a lot of great law enforcement out there. I do think, though, that there is an overall lack of human decency and a lack of value of life of people of color. And I think that the issue is that this very low bar that has been set for how we deal with people of color in society is reinforced by systemic racism that exists in our systems, in our laws, and in the messages that we send people. It's positive, it's reinforced
Mhm.
over and over again. And so, no, I don't think that they are hunting us, but I think when they run up on us, there is an overall lack of value for
Yeah.
our lives. And, until now,
Mhm.
they have gotten away with it every single time.
Some say that um, we put ourselves in a situation. Some say that, we made stupid judgments, thus causing the police officer to act the way he did. My my approach is when I get pulled over, I always put my hands outside the car
Mhm.
to make the officer feel, okay, your life isn't threatened. And one night I got pulled over, Doc, and the cop walked up to the car and he started laughing. And he said, "Man," he said, "Don't. It's okay. Don't worry about it." Because I was speeding, I was wrong, but he gave me warning and let me go. But sometimes, there are situations where it doesn't it doesn't end up the way it ended up for me.
It's true. Now, I will say that, I'm from California, but I've been in the Mountain State a decade. I It is not to say that we don't have cops here. Anything is possible anywhere. I do think, though, that the policing culture is a little bit different in West Virginia than it is in some of the major metropolitan cities. I live in a smaller town than you do. All the cops that work the beat where I live know me, know my car, um, and they are much more accessible here. But that is not the case everywhere.
Yes.
It's just not the reality. And sometimes it's hard for people in West Virginia because they believe that our culture is different here. And true enough, I believe it is. It's hard for them to understand why we still here are affected by what's going on nationwide. And when I try to explain to people, true, the policing culture may be a little bit different here, but anything is possible anywhere. And this is just a small microcosm of the bigger picture of systemic racism. We cannot get comfortable here because someone has not been shot in the street here. We cannot become complacent and think that systemic racism doesn't exist in our laws, in our state mandates, in our ordinances. They
Right.
are here. And so it behooves us to continue to educate people. It behooves us to continue to have these type of conversations so that people understand just because it's not happening on your street does not mean that in some ways in bordering states, because we
Yes.
absolutely are.
Yes. Doc, I'm 50 years old. And some folks out here who are around my age, maybe a little bit younger, they don't understand the systemic parts of racism. They're, in quotation marks, they're new to the party. Whereas, luckily, my generation right now really haven't faced the full term of racism like my parents did and my grandparents did back then. But the thing is, it's still systemic. It's still going on. Right now, it's just a remix. It's still going on, and we still face it every day. And some of these folks out here just don't understand. And you try to explain to them, and it's like, oh, no, you're wrong, you're wrong. We know. We face it every day. We know the dog whistles. We know some of the subtle hints, things of that sort. And some folks just don't understand. I mean, it's like you try to argue with them till you're blue in the face, and it's like you just give up and say, you know what, I'm done.
Yeah, so what I would say to that is that people, and by the way, we're in the same generation, people
Right.
who are in our age group
Mhm.
have absolutely experienced discrimination. It just doesn't look the same as what their parents experienced. It's way more covert, it's way more subtle. No, we're not having to drink out of different drinking fountains. We all get to sit in the same place in the movie theater. We all get to go to the same schools and get the same books and the same materials. Our schools are not, segregated. And most of the time, people are not calling us derogatory slurs to our face, but it is happening in different ways. It is
Yes.
happening by keeping us out of certain spaces, keeping us out of, off of certain committees, keeping us from promotion, keeping us from the same access to resources, keeping us from the small business loans, keeping us from access to capital. So there are a lot of other ways that systemic racism comes into place, but we see it differently. And because we don't have the, overt atrocities happening to us, does not mean that we are not being affected by systemic racism. Just because you let me in the door does not mean that you're not racist, because you let me in the door, but you aren't giving me a seat at the table.
Yes.
And I tell people all the time, if you don't have a seat at the table, you're on the menu.
There you go. Yes.
I say it all the time. So I think that we can't become complacent, and we do have to educate people who think, well, I have my little 9 to 5 and I have a house and I can go get things to eat. Is that it? Do you really just want to survive?
Mhm.
I want to thrive. I want to thrive and have the access to the American dream that any other person has. I don't want just the crumbs that falls from the master's table. That, that's biblical.
Right.
I don't want that. I want a seat at the table. And I think that for far too long, we have been not granted access to some of the things that I feel are key to actually living out the American dream. And people need to open their eyes. Yes, we've come a long way, but we're not there yet.
Doc, you mentioned training, education.
Mm-hmm.
When a police officer has done something wrong, and the first thing the higher ups, like the chiefs and the mayors, better police training. Is that a cop out to you?
Yes. Let me tell you why that's a cop out. Because I have broached the subject here in my little small town. And one of the reasons that it feels like a cop out, particularly in our state, is that when they do look for training, guess who's training them? Someone from the police department.
Right.
Someone who is already intimately connected with the culture, instead of bringing in a consultant or someone from the outside who can objectively look and give the department first a needs assessment. Organizational psychology will tell you that there is a very laid out blueprint for how to do a training, how to help any type of department, whether it's Fortune 500 or a police department, ways to get the department to improve. So first of all, doing a very objective needs assessment, and then from the needs assessment, putting together and formulating a training that will very specifically meet those needs. But if you are so ingrained in the culture already, if you already know the verbiage and the terminology that is used, you will have blind spots. There's no way for you to be able to really ascertain and be able to put into effect that are going to help break down the system.
Yes.
That is already stacked against people who have been oppressed and may not target or highlight the behaviors and the mode of thinking that needs to be changed in order for everyone to be safer. So sometimes it is definitely a cop-out. Can be.
Doc, give the viewer a brief exercise, something that can tease their brain and kind of make them think like, okay, you know what? I never knew that about me. I never knew this was my way of thinking or why my actions are like this. Can you give the viewer a little something to really ponder on?
So I think one of the things that is very salient for what we're talking about is being able to self-regulate and gauge when you are afraid and about to respond in a way that is not equivalent to the situation at hand. The first thing I tell people to do, even though fear is upon you, we talk about fight or flight, but I think that we have to get better at mediating our own affect and regulating how we feel. So as soon as I start to feel afraid, one of the first things that I tell myself to do is start breathing even more deeply, even in that moment before I react. I do a lot of self-talk. So that's one thing that I would tell people to do is increase the volume on your inside voice box and tell yourself to start breathing. When you start breathing more deeply, you're getting more oxygen to the brain and it allows you to think a little more clearly. So the first thing to do is start breathing. The second thing to do is think about the situation. What is the danger? What is the immediate danger right now in this moment? What is that? Oh, they're pointing a gun at me, or they're pointing a knife at me, or they're screaming at me and they're cussing at me. They're evading me. They're walking the other way and I'm not done with this. What is the immediate danger? after you think about what the immediate danger is, think about the resources. What do you have that is equivalent to mediating the situation? Do you have a taser? Do you have a knife? I live in West Virginia, so I'm always packing. But what do you what is the equivalent? What do I have that can meet whatever the danger is? And is it really a danger? Is this really a danger? Just ask yourself that. And then if you can live with whatever the consequences are, make a move. Make a
Doc,
move.
make a move. Okay, okay. So I've said this before, that the police officer is the most powerful person in the judicial system, the most powerful, because they're going to say whatever they want to. They can lie, and some way,
Okay.
somehow, they get off. You know, again, last week, that 13-year-old kid, Toledo, you know, they said they felt fear for their life. They told the kid to drop the gun, and he did. I mean, within, a second, he is shot in the chest. So how do you justify? And he say, okay, well, he complied. At the same time, the police lied on the report. And I know, I mean, I'm sure, and it's that band of brotherhood, you know, with the badge.
It's mob culture with the badge. Just
Yeah.
like, me talking about the mob culture showing up on people's lawns, it
Mhm.
can be still seen as the mob culture with the badge, understanding that you are emboldened and you start feeling braver in a group than you would individually, because you know that mob is going to back you up. And so again, for the first time in the Chauvin situation, we saw the blue wall with some cracks in it, right? Because usually they go down, they band together. This is something that we have never seen before, where we saw law enforcement take the stand and say, that is not how we were trained. That is not what we have been taught to do. And it was excessive. It was excessive force. Now, would they have band together if that brave teenage girl on the street had not, video recorded what happened? I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But it was 9 minutes and 29 seconds of what could not be denied.
Yes.
And so, you made the point that if we didn't have social media, this would not have gotten out. And I think that we have to absolutely take the bitter with the sweet when it comes to social media, because certainly, there have been very negative aspects of social media, but then some things that have brought to light what many of us have known about for years, forever. Some people are shocked by it. Oh my God, does that happen? And the rest of us are like, oh, well, finally, people see what we've either known about or witnessed in the street forever.
Yes.
So I do think that there is some validity to understanding how important it is to individuate from the mob or from the culture that makes it feel all right to mistreat people, knowing that there are no ramifications to your actions. And so accountability certainly has happened, and I think we have to continue to hold people accountable for their behavior.
Let's look at the politics behind Blue Lives Matter. January 6th. That's all we got to say, January 6th. A lot of folks who believe in Blue Lives Matter, and it's safe. It's safe to say, majority white people are for Blue Lives Matter. Then that's fine. But when January 6th rolled around, you heard nothing from them. And you have some of these elected politicians, they were quiet.
So
Talk to me about that.
So let me say, again, lots of law enforcement in my family. I will say that I think both Black Lives Matter and Blue Lives Matter started out with very genuine motive and intent. And I think you will agree with me that even Black Lives Matter has strayed from the original motive and intent.
Yes,
and
yes, I have. Yes.
The original players and, for what they stood. What has unfortunately happened with Blue Lives Matter, which I believe that Blue Lives Matter. However, I think that it took a very negative political turn as the Trump administration was in office. And I think what happened was it became embraced by hate groups. It became embraced by very anti-Semitic groups. It became embraced by folks who I think were contrary to the original motive and intent of the movement. And so now we are in a place where we are expecting, like on January 6th, we were expecting people who supported the movement from the beginning to step up and say something. And those people are long gone. Why? Because that movement has turned into something that many of them don't truly embrace or believe in. So that's why we haven't heard so many of them step up and say, that was horrible, that was wrong. We haven't heard many people step up and say, that is terrible that they hurt, officers and that they had no value or, remorse for what they did that day. And I think it is for some of the same reasons that you haven't heard Black Lives Matter step up and claim some of the things that have happened in the streets, the looting, the setting on fire and the tipping of things over, because those folks, I don't think were in support of some of the very, dastardly things that we saw. So I think it's, as my daddy would say, 6 in one hand and half a dozen in the other. I think both of these organizations people have piled on and aligned themselves with what the movement is now or what it looks like now, as opposed to what it was when it first began.
As we look at the training, we look at the policy, do you feel that in light of the Derek Chauvin trial, do you feel that the policy will change with the Fraternal Order of Police? Do you think it will change?
I'm hopeful that it will change. As I watch the news and I'm tracking politically what's happening with police reform, bills that they are bringing forward that seem to be nonpartisan or to actually have buy-in from both sides. But one of the things in doing research and also listening to some of the analysis given by the media is that this has happened before. After trials, after we see uprisings, and after funerals where we've said, okay, police reform has to happen, it has a lot of momentum and then it dies. And then it turns into some, political gerrymandering on both sides. And it doesn't go anywhere. So I am hopeful that this will not die, that it won't die on the vine. Hopefully it will become wine and it'll be palatable for all of us. But we've seen this before, and hopefully it has a different ending. Hopefully it's scripted differently so that we aren't emotional in this moment and see everyone on board for police reform and then it die on the hill. I'm hoping that doesn't happen.
One other factor, and I have a couple more questions, I'm gonna let you go. One other factor, as far as when it comes to police and civilian, especially persons of color, is the victimization factor. You know, we see that we look at Trayvon Martin. Oh, he smoked weed and this and that, blah, blah, blah. You know, George Floyd. Oh, he used drugs. He's a thug. You know, the 16-year-old Nikaya, you know, she's in a foster home.
And had a knife. So
No, I don't understand it, you know?
well, these are all ways and attempts to justify the actions of the police. And the bottom line is there is no justification for killing people when you inaccurately assess the danger. When the problem is an inaccurate assessment in your anticipation of danger, going back to the definition that I gave when we first started, that is the fundamental problem. And it wouldn't be the fundamental problem if your assessment for danger was the same across the board.
Okay.
And that's just not what's happening. Someone with an AR-15, you're assessing at a lower place of danger and you're taking them alive. That's what the real issue is.
Let's look back a couple months ago in Columbus, where the one young man was shot and killed, and he had a Subway sandwich in his hand. Nothing was said, you know, about him. And in fact, right now, I mean, I've heard nothing since about the situation.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, why are folks doing a checklist, doing a rundown on, let's see, what has he done? Did he do this? Did he do that? Did he commit crimes, any felonies, any misdemeanors? Oh, he did this. Oh, there we go. There's justification right there to shooting and killing him.
So the positive and the bright side of that is that was the attempt with George Floyd. That was the attempt of the defense to slander his character in order to justify the actions of Mr. Chauvin, from his history with substance abuse, an enlarged heart, the counterfeit money, the alleged counterfeit money before the cops arrived. I mean, they tried their hardest to do that and to bring up all of the things that you're suggesting to use as justification. And the bright side is that the jury did not buy it. The jury was able to separate his perceived character flaws from the actions of the police officer for 9 minutes and 29 seconds, which they felt was plenty time to assess the threat level and to anticipate any danger. That there was no danger with your knee on his neck for that amount of time.
Yeah.
And so thank God that that has been a tactic that has worked for so long. It has worked, being able to slander someone's character in order to justify behavior. But the precedent has been set that probably no longer is going to work. And that's why this verdict, and I've seen it all over Facebook, you know, and social media. This is not justice. This was accountability. And that's all it is. It was one step. But I would argue that it was much bigger than that. It wasn't just a guilty verdict. There were many wins in this. And this was very layered and it's very dimensional. We can't just look at it one way. And I think you and I have uncovered something else that is a win here, is that something that has been used over and over again, a loud and clear message has been sent. That's not okay anymore. That is not going to fly anymore. And more must be done to accurately assess the danger and the threat level.
Last question, and it's a two-part question.
Okay.
What is your assessment of police reform, and should we do something with it?
So that is going to be tricky because I think that there are so many facets to policing. There are decades and decades of poor and bad learned behavior. And in a lot of places, we may need to tear it down and build it back up. I think that I'm glad that I'm not in the position to have to make the decision about how that needs to happen, because, some departments are better and worse than others. And, the culture of policing is so ingrained in people that it's a tough job. Somebody needs to do it. Glad it's not me, but something must be done. And it starts with changing the cultural perception, not just from within the department, but outside of it as well. We as a nation have to give the same value to human life across the board. And that message has to be sent loud and clear that this life is just as valuable as the other. And I think when those messages reflect also what is happening in the police department and the messages that are being sent to them, I think that all of that will play into police reform. I have all kinds of things going on in my background.
I hear you. Dr. Dumas, thank you very much for joining our voices. Thank you for sharing your voice.
Absolutely.
You take care, and look here. By the way, please tell Big Dumas I said what's up.
I certainly will.
All right, all right.